Okay. Nice. Default. Let's see. Okay, cool. It says, let me know if people can hear me. I basically had to like reinstall some stuff. Yeah, welcome back to YouTube. So let me post that we are indeed on YouTube. Cool. We're ready to go. Yeah. We also have our teaching assistant, William, is here. Hi, William. He's showing me his Daniel Tiger figure. Do you want... Yo, come on in, camera. Come on. Say hello. Are you on the camera? Okay. He's gonna be milling around in the background. So yeah, I'm trying to think of housekeeping stuff. I'm continuing to catch up with animations. They're looking good. I also realized that I'm behind on archiving some of these lectures, so I'm going to make sure to get back on that now that we've got our setup more or less back in order. Just a reminder that for the animation print, like, so last week, this week, and next week, somebody asks how old is he now? He is what? A year and 4 months. So, what was I talking about? I was talking about assignments. So last week's assignment, this week assignment, next week assignment, you only have to do 2 of the 3 drawings, because I know that this class has become a lot of work, and under normal circumstances it would be a lot of work, but like manageable work. But it's instead just, I know, become kind of a slog. So I figured, like, let's reduce some of that intense stuff for the time being. And then after the principles of animation, I think it's only like 1 or 2 weeks before your homeworks really switch over to being things that contribute to like your final project, which, remember, is not a full short, it's an animatic. So you don't even have to do a full short for the final. You're doing an animatic because, you know, as you're experiencing, animation takes a long time. And that's okay. Like, you know, the idea is that you get, again, that like kinesthetic experience with how animation works and things like that. So, yeah, today, speaking of how animation works, let's continue talking about the principles of animation in part 2 of our Principles of Animation series, where we talk about follow-through / overlapping action, slow in and slow out, arcs, and secondary action. Now you're like, what is all that? Well, by the way, I found out that this GIF is made by a company in Cleveland. So, you know, if you're looking for jobs, I guess go look up China Creative Group, because they actually seem to be doing some really cool stuff with like digital media and things like that. So go check that out. But today's topics, we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna talk about, and it sounds like these are complex things because there's like this and that, and they are to a degree, like anything is, but I don't think anything quite comes with like all of the nuance like we had in like last week with Squash and Stretch. Like last week with Squash and Stretch, there was like a lot of things in terms of, well, do this, but don't do it if it's made of metal, and don't do it if it doesn't fit your art style. Do it but do it in those cases if you really need to punch something through. There aren't quite as many ifs with these. They're a little more straightforward, but I think it's more that they like appear in places you don't realize they do. So again, we're going to talk about follow through and overlapping action. We're going to talk about slow in and slow out. We're going to talk about arcs, and we're going to talk about secondary action. So these principles mainly deal with all of the ways that an animation follows the principle, the laws of physics. So last week was giving, animated characters a sense of physics via, like, giving them a sense of math through squash and stretch. This time, more like it's about inertia, and it's about, sort of like the principles of motion. So I posted an article in the Animation Links channel about GIFs and like bringing pencil tests to life from Disney animators, and that's actually going to be a big part of the slideshow today. So I'm in. Oh, my stream is lagging a lot. Let's see why. I have Teams open. I could stand to get rid of Teams. I could probably stand. Okay, looks okay on the OBS end. Wonder if there's anything else I can get rid of. I need my browser open so that I can stream. All right, is it okay now? Is it better now? I'm trying to shut down some stuff that I know might take up some app and browser control. Okay. All right. So I'm going to keep going and see if this improves anything. So, I doubt that was it, but it's much better now. Okay, I'm going to switch over where I am to yeah, it's doing better. Awesome, thank you. So I'm going to switch over where my window is to allow you to see the text here. But so follow through and overlapping action is probably our more in terms of like I don't know, not theoretically complicated, but in terms of like how much you need to know, it's probably our more complex information that you need to be aware of right now for this week. And part of that is that there's just a lot of parts to it. So overlap or follow through and overlapping action really has 3 parts, even though it comes across as 2 parts. It has follow through, which is if you have loosely tied parts of the body, they continue moving when stopped in relation to like the forces of inertia. So inertia is that whatever state of movement matter is in, it will not want to leave that state. So if it's moving, it will not want to slow down. If it's being still, it doesn't want to start moving. So understanding that will help you understand the idea that, for example, and the reason that this GIF is here, as the princess runs in our game, parts of her body follow through with inertia. So she has this very light shawl that kind of like flaps very lightly in the wind behind her. She has a braid that flops around. as she moves. Same with like, you know, the little anime lick of hair in the front, and then her dress also, you know, flaps behind her. So this is a character that's built with a lot of follow through, and overlapping action, you know, is part of, you know, different parts of the body will move on different timings. So, you know, the reason that these two things are paired together, because they could discuss, you know, it sounds like overlapping action is like any different movement. Oh, sorry, Will is... Where did my camera go? Will just shook my desk. See. Okay, cool. Seems better. It's a little tilted, but we'll make do. So the no, stop that. Don't do that. So you're getting a sense of overlapping action right now from a thing that's sitting on the desk while it's moving. You're getting like the VR overlapping action experience right now because you are on the thing that's overlapping, which is my camera as the desk shakes. Buddy, we can't shake the desk, okay? Okay. Here, do you want Ness? There you go. Go play with Ness. All right, he likes Ness. So yeah, overlapping action is, in this case, it discusses when, you know, when you are moving the, you know, the braid here, it doesn't move on exactly the same timing. It moves on a slightly delayed timing so that it comes across as being impacted by the force. Yeah. It comes across as being impacted. Do you want Duck Hunt Dog? I have a bunch of amiibo on my desk. It comes across as being impacted by the movement of the body. Okay, do you just want them all? Okay. So then you also have drag, which is again related to overlapping action, which is that idea of when parts of the body require a few frames to catch up to the rest. So basically, if something is following behind via follow through, it works on a delayed timing through drag, and thus provides a sense of overlapping action. Having those multiple timelines of action and pacing of action will seem to give your animation, again, more life. Now, this is not to say that the actions that you animate need to be, you know, if you're animating on twos and then you have like things happening through follow through that suddenly your timeline is unreadable because it's all on ones. That's not what I'm talking about. You can have everything animated on the same twos, but maybe as a character is, you know, going down on a run cycle, the braid is up, and then when they hit the ground, their braid is still up, and then as they start to lift off into the next part of the run, the braid comes down. You know, so the idea of like when you are in the air, let me just do it this way. When you're in the air and stuff is like, you're following the main body, you know, whatever is loose from the body will react and is acting therefore behind and providing overlapping action. What'd you drop? Did you drop the Pikmin? Okay, careful with those. So that's the basics. Let's look at some. So enough from me on this. I want you to tell me about this. So like, here's one from our textbook of a particularly cartoony character. So what follow through do you see in this? Like, what pieces of the body are follow? I guess the first question is, what is the main force? Like, what is providing the force? Like, what part of the body is providing the force here? That's question number one. Anybody? Which part of the body is everything else reacting to, thus providing like the main force of the body movement? Oh. Okay, cool. So yes, somebody said the head. Is the stream coming in okay? Because the video's showing a little laggy. I can't tell if it's that I'm actually laggy or if it's just... My wife is also in a meeting. Right now we're having like dueling meetings. So that might be also an issue. Okay, so some of you did say the head, which is good. Yeah, that's what the main body force is it's the head. And since the head is the main source of movement, now I guess the next question is, what are some other parts of the body that are following through? Every time there's a gap, it lags. Yeah, I mean, the only other option would be to not have GIFs in a animation theory class, and that's not really gonna happen. Okay, but what is following through with the? Let me see. You should still be able to see some of the, frames of animation and get a sense of like what is and is not moving. So, jeez, LastPass Manager stuff. Okay, that seems to be better. Yeah, so the legs are following through. I guess here's a good example then. When it hits the ground, what happens? Like, what parts of the body are then, affected by inertia? So somebody said nose, legs, yeah. So you see what happens. Now this is like an exaggerated version of this. So it's not exactly a, real people when they're tired do not fall over like this. This is obviously exaggerated, which is one of the principles of animation, actually, is exaggeration. But the idea is that when a character falls like this, you can see really well that the inertia built up is going to let it out after like the main part of the body that's moving has stopped moving. Everything else starts to like catch up. And here they add a lot more emphasis to the point where like the body's even kind of doing the worm. So that adds a really, really interesting amount of follow through. So here's another one drawn by Milt Kahl for the movie Bambi. So where do you see follow through? Where do you see follow through here? This one's a little tougher. Yeah, you found the Mario hat. Mario. Yeah, it's Mario. Do you want to wear the Mario hat? Oh, Mario hat. So yeah, somebody said there's follow through on the ears. You also get a little follow through, on the tail. So Bambi, it's not that the movie is rendered like hyper realistically, but it's not as floppy a character as as this guy here. So Bambi is rendered a little more, the follow through is a little more subtle, and you get a little less exaggeration with this character in particular. And the last one from Disney. What about this one? Where are we seeing exaggeration here? Or not exaggeration. Where are we seeing, your follow through here? And this one's by the animator Mark Davis. So this would have been drawn again in the 1950s because it came out in the 50s. Okay. And where is our... Oh, I see that the thing is stuck on Bambi. Okay, maybe I'm just stuck on Bambi. All right, so hair and skirt. So the thing that's interesting about this one, again, this is not super exaggerated, but you get follow through in that her hair is... My son has found a Super Mario hat, so he's just like screaming out Mario. So you get overlapping action. The hair and the skirt are delayed and are following through with the rest of her body. But again, like what's interesting, I think, too, about the skirt is that because of how much of the dress you see... Now he's upset that he can't leave. Because of how much of the dress you see in this animation, what's really animating is just some lines and the arc of lines. So that's kind of interesting that you can create such a strong effect with such simple and likewise you don't really see the curls of hair that much. So these are relatively simple techniques in this particular animation. So I'm totally going to be band that goes after the Beatles here in showing my how few frames can we use game animation after a Disney animation. But we see a few elements of this in The Princess's Attack. Now I should say that recalibrate our brains a little bit here. When you're doing video game animation for hand-drawn games, I could do honestly an entire lecture on the ways that we've had to tweak or mess with the principles of animation to account for the needs of a video game. I'm not going to, but I'm, and if any of you are wondering what those are, if you're doing a hand-drawn video game, you can't do, for example, as much anticipation as you normally would, because everything has to be mapped to button presses and has to provide as quick of feedback as possible. There's a lot of little ways you have to cheat the ways that again, film animation happens. Same with how many frames you can use for walks and runs and motions versus film animation. So it's kind of there's a lot to be said there in terms of how these rules are broken or bent when doing animation for different media, basically. We're not going to get into them there in here. Just suffice to say that this character animation uses, again, I said the princess is almost all follow through. And what's interesting, what we've done with her is really play with that idea of, her dress and her shawl that drags behind her we use that to really emphasize certain motions, and we make it sort of like change volume depending on what she's doing to almost become like a... Did he leave? Okay, that's a thing that happened. It becomes a tool of her magic, right? It becomes like the thing that she conjures her magic through. So, here, for example, where with Nemo we used like a motion trail to communicate his sword swing, here we've actually just not done a motion trail at all, and instead use her shawl, her pink shawl, as a sort of like motion trail stand-in to give the same idea. And then again, you have like the hair reacting, the skirt reacting. This is like she's casting a spell. She's a magic user, so she basically like emits a Mega Man style like projectile. But that's what happens, is that like a big projectile would come off of her, and then you'd get the sense of like magic power being used. That's why everything sort of blows back when she does her spells. So, any questions about especially since we were lagging a lot, are there any questions or anything you want me to go back to for follow through? I'm going to take a second to go check to make sure that Will hasn't gotten into anything, but I will respond to questions in the chat. Oh, where is he? Oh, he's on the bed? Okay. Is he okay? Okay.
I took him over.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I unlocked the door.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Because I'm done with my meeting, so now you can teach.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Good.
All right, awesome.
Mario.
All right, any questions on any questions on follow through? Like I said, given that we had a lot of lag. Gonna set my amiibo back up. He is being entertained right now out of here. Really, no questions? Okay, well, I guess if you think of any, you know what? I'm going to do the thing. Ask me 2 questions before we move on. Ask me 2 questions about everything we've talked about, or things in general. Thank you. Yeah, I like this run cycle a lot. Okay. I'll count the comment on the run cycle as 1 question. So ask me 1 more question before we move on. I'm doing the thing that I do in person where I don't let people I don't move the lecture forward until I... How's the game coming along? Thank you for asking. It's going pretty well. Oh, okay, here's so let me answer these questions in order. So game's going well. What we're doing is we're working on the trailer, so we're actually, you all get a early view at some of what's going on just because I'm like trying to use stuff that I've made as examples as opposed to just using like textbook Disney stuff or Warner Brothers stuff from the internet. I think it's good as somebody who's like a practitioner in the field to talk about your projects, not as like a promotional thing, but as a like, hey, I've done this, so I can tell you from experience what it's like working with it. So you're actually getting a preview of some of the content that's in the trailer, mainly just because I'm showing you animations I've prepared for it. But it's going well. I've got, I think, one more bigger animation to do, and then a little animation of just like Nemo falling out of the bed, and then I'll be able to get some like just environment art to dress up some of the scenes. But that's how it's going. And then somebody says, is there too much follow through that you can have on a character? Not really. It kind of depends. This is where you get into the what is the style and what is the material. So if it's like a bed sheet or if it's cloth, it's going to wave a lot. If it's like an ear that's on the character, or like part of the character's body, then it kind of depends on like, again, the Bambi one was really subtle, but you can imagine that if you were doing like a basset hound, that would be like all flop, all follow through. But on the flip side with that, you have like, imagine a basset hound in like a 101 Dalmatians style movie where it would be really floppy and follow throughy, but a little more straightforward, versus like a basset hound animated in like a Tex Avery cartoon where it would almost be like a liquid. And you can do that. You can like, calibrate it to the art style a little bit. So, the answer is no, but you can also accomplish different things based on your art style, depending on how much you wanna do. That was a good question. So the next one is slow in, slow out, and this is actually like the run cycle. This run cycle is nice because there's a lot of slow in and slow out on it, but because we have different levels of slow in and slow out on the character's run cycles, but Nemo's in particular is supposed to be like adventure. So he holds his ups a little more. But slow in, slow out is basically when you, and we've talked about this in terms of timing, when you are at a key pose, you're going to have more frames of animation around the key poses to kind of like cushion them than you would in the middle. So what this looks like is, and one thing that a lot of new animators do, and I would say slow in, slow out is the thing I'm worst at right now. But one thing that a lot of new animators do, and this is also something that I think people who, and this is why it's a thing that I'm trying to still work on. Because if you come from computer animation, you are used to tweening. So I know like a lot of you are in the computer animation class, and as or if you've ever used Flash as well, you are aware that you can set keyframe number 1 and keyframe number 5, and then the computer will make whatever's in the middle for you. The problem with that is that you get really used to that, and you come to rely on that. But the problem with this, and I'll emphasize this with like a story so you don't want it to be even, basically. But the problem with this, with it being kind of like too even throughout and having the same pacing. When I was in college, I took a Photoshop course, and the Photoshop teacher, like I'd been using Photoshop. I took this as like a senior year class blow-off class, and because like I had been using Photoshop like on my own for a while, and then as part of my classwork for architecture classes, like making graphic designs and things like that to present our projects, I was doing a lot of Photoshop work. So I thought, like, all right, I can just come in here and just own this class. It's going to be super easy. And I remember my first assignment, my first homework assignment, getting a really tough critique on it, because even though, and it's the classic, like, why should I pay you so much to do this for me when my high school student knows Photoshop? Well, it's that there's a difference between knowing software and having a careful artistic eye and a sense of good taste to understand how to actually use these tools to make good art. And again, it's the difference between like why we're here and not at like ITT Tech. I know I keep talking smack, but that's like an easy one because they're not really a thing as much anymore. Westwood College, who actually is not a thing anymore. They were shut down for being bad. So, that kind of like, we're just going to train you type of education. This is the difference, is that I was used to like, I have all these tools and I'm going to drop shadow and I'm going to bevel emboss, I'm going to do all these things. And then I got the feedback like, oh, it looks Photoshoppy. Well, this is the equivalent, this even pacing, too even pacing, and relying on tweens gives you, I don't know if flashy is bad because that makes it sound like it's like, ooh, flashy. But it's too computerized, it's too digital. And we don't want it to be digital. We want it to have a sense of motion and weight. Even because, and again, this is where, we don't dump out the technique just because the tool has changed. All right, somebody says, this is like what we did with the ball bounce. There's fewer frames where the ball falls to where it hits the ground. Otherwise, timing would look a bit strange. Yeah, exactly. So, in case you haven't noticed, a lot of the exercises you've been doing actually already had the principles of animation. So again, the ball bounce had lots of squash and stretch. The ball bounce had slow in, slow out. It had a lot of these things because I wanted you, even though we were, waiting till like the middle of the semester to do this series on the principles of animation, I wanted you to get again, like a physical awareness of it by drawing it. And then it's that sort of thing where, when you learn about animation, if you watch a lot of cartoons, you'll be like, oh yeah, I can now think of a cartoon where that happened. Or, those of you in game design, there's a lot of those where it's like, oh, if I think to, how Salen and Zimmerman talk about reward systems in games, yeah, I can think about games where I've seen that before. Now you just have like a vocabulary for it. So, slow in and slow out is where, again, if we look at these two different versions, the one on the left that I put the giant red X over is perhaps like if you had a flash animation of a ballerina and you put the key pose for like the bottom of, I don't know ballet. So this particular movement, I don't know the exact name of, but like when she, lifts her leg up, if you just put it at the beginning and the end of the pose, you are going to get it. The computer is going to evenly, in a computer fashion, perfectly computer interpolate the two and have an even movement. And it will look like it is computer interpolated. Whereas, somebody who practices the actual art of animation is going to, put a, you'd make your keys and then you would make your breakdown in the middle and then you'd add in-betweens, you'd keyframe in-betweens, keyframing referring to like, when you, computer programs call everything keyframes, but like you'd put frames for your in-betweens to slow in, slow out at the points where they are, and then that makes a better feeling animation again opposed to like a computer interpolated thing like in Flash or in Maya. So this is one way that I actually think that the computer tools get in our way, which again is why we've said me and the other faculty members made the decision to focus so much on some of the hand-drawn animation. Now you've seen this graphic before, and this graphic, so we talked about this in the spacing and timing lecture because we were looking at the spacing and timing of walk cycles and, how to work with key poses. So, the black ones are the key poses, and they're even attitude poses. They're showing that the dog is feeling very confident. By the way, I'd like to point out, so there's this character Earless Dog in character animation Crash Course. And the reason that Earless Dog is earless is because of follow through. So his role is to show us like basic movements. And if Goldberg had to animate the ears and tail for all of these things, then it would not only it would make drawing for this much more complex, but it would also drown out the lesson to have the ears flopping all over the place in things like this. So, here's an example of where an animator might animate the dog doing stuff without ears and tail with, pose to pose animation, and then would go back and do straight ahead animation to add the ears and tail once they have worked out the actual keyframe based body movement. So again, and if you're noticing that I'm going back and talking about principles from last week, it's because all of these principles work in concert. It's that you are trying to learn these in a cumulative fashion so that you have them all in your toolbox to work with. And again, you're seeing them all used throughout my examples as well. But in terms of the actual spacing and timing, you're familiar with the keyframes and the breakdowns here. But if we look again at the in-between chart, look at where there are drawings. And now I know we're not seeing all the drawings, but I just want you to see, if you understand an in-between chart, that, the key poses are the circled ones. The breakdown is number 9 and number 25, which are the underlined ones. And then all the smaller numbers are your in-betweens. But look at how many in-betweens, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, are so tightly packed around the keyframe. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is in between, or are tightly packed. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 are tightly packed in spacing. So you can imagine that when this animator fully has all of the frames, there's going to be a lot of time spent around, very close to those key attitude poses. And then they're going to kind of quickly go through the actual arc of walking. And then just to show you, I don't have a GIF made of this yet, but let me see. Okay, cool. I don't have a GIF of this made yet, but I actually am working on something that utilizes some slow in, slow out. And in fact, I made it without some slow in, slow out yesterday. I just got my key poses down, and then I moved frames around to be all right, well, I need to, where am I starting? Where am I finishing? Where do I need to slow the pace down to get it to work better? So I don't have the in-betweens for the slow in yet, but by moving the frames around, it creates a little delay that you can see. So this is Dr. Pill. He's a character from Little Nemo. And he's our shopkeeper. So he's going to be a snake oil salesman, and which I thought is very very era appropriate. Maybe this would be the end of Snake Oil Salesman. But if I play this, you see that now again it freezes here because I don't have this in between drawn yet, and I don't have an in between drawn here at the end either. So that's why he just kind of stays like this, even though his cart does like one more bounce. But, you know, it's going to be slow as he like carefully, like and I need to add some frames at the beginning too. But he very gingerly places his case on the ground, and then the case starts to like shake or like undulate and get all bouncy and squashy and stretchy because it's gonna like and turn into his cart. But you see here too, he's gonna move very fast from here, and in fact, if you see the oh, I can't. If you see, oh, come on. There. So if you see the, I keep using my pen as though my mouse is visible with it. But if you see, like, using the onion skinning, I don't know how well it's showing up on the stream, but the red past frame and then, you know, his, like, little scoot and then the end frame, you know, it goes through this really quickly. And it actually goes into, this uses probably like our next animation principle as well, which is going to be arcs. But I create an arc so that he kind of slinks across. If anybody's ever played the Aladdin game for Sega Genesis, this is actually pretty heavily based on the Aladdin merchant animation from Sega Genesis. It's a little call out to that. But, you know, again, I need to draw something here, like a little anticipation for him going, ta-da! And then likewise here I need to give him a little, like, you know, but you see that's going to be very slow. He doesn't move that much. So yeah, that's slow. That's an example of, like, you know, again, that's what is beneficial about being able to, like, grab and move keyframes, is that you can, you know, make some frames and then look at it and then be like, well, maybe I need more slow in and slow out, and, you know, redistribute frames around. So that's kind of nice about working in, you know, computer stuff like this. So any questions about slow in, slow out? Somebody already did have a really good question, so ask me one question. All right. One question. Anybody? Anybody? Doesn't even have to be a question about the lesson. It can just be like, what's up? What's your favorite color? I just want to get the chat moving, basically, is why I do this now. Otherwise, I'm just chatting at a text box, and that's no fun. Does it take a long time to understand when and where you need to put frames for your animations? That's an interesting question. It does. So the question again, does it take a long time to understand when and where you need to put frames for your animations? Yes, I would say it does. This is why. So what's helped me is like, I don't know how the I can't imagine what it was like for the guys at, and I mean, it really was guys, so I can, use that Midwesternism. But I can't imagine what it was like for the people working at like early animation studios figuring this stuff out, and especially like the Disney animation studio in particular, because it was like that was the one where they were trying to really figure out these principles. Otherwise, like stuff in the 20s, if you look at 20s animation, it was really evenly timed, and it didn't have slow in, slow out, and it didn't necessarily have anticipation and stuff like that. Same thing with like, going back to J. Stewart Blackton and like McKay and people like that. It's like, how the heck did they figure this out? Apart from like watching things. But so, yes, it's hard. But what I mean by being like, I can't imagine being any of these people who developed animation is that they didn't have books and tutorials and guides. Like, you can go to Animation Mentor or Cartoon Brew or go to your textbooks, and that's specifically why we assigned the textbooks we assigned, the textbooks and the recommended readings. And this is why in classes I always say, like, oh my gosh, keep these textbooks, please. Order them and keep them. Because it's not that we are going to require textbook use and in such a way that we give you quizzes, and that's usually like when people ask, do we need the textbook, it's really, are you going to enforce this so I can not spend the money? But when it comes down, like, what we do with recommending these things is we're trying to get you to, like, we're giving you references, basically. We want there to be references on your shelf, and that's like the best mechanism we have to do it. But really, my recommendation is like, look at that stuff. Even if you don't sit down and read something cover to cover, just like flip through it and know where the guides are, because that is honestly what has helped me. Is, like I said, I mean, I've done a lot through mostly computer animation and 3D animation, and I did like some 2D animation, but not to this extent that I'm doing it now. And I can kind of like, as I'm doing some of these, it becomes less daunting, and I'm kind of like feeling myself level up through all of this. I'm not trying to like be a cheesy, gamer dude by being like level up, but it really does feel like, I can look at animations and be like, that was when I was at this level of experience. This is when I was at that level of experience. And you do get a sense of like, we've all been staring at chat. Yeah, we have. So, it takes, the time is shortened because you can open the book and you can open Character Animation Crash Course and be like, all right, how long should a fast walk be? Okay. And then you can do it. Like, you can put, keyframe 1 and at 17, and then know that your breakdowns should probably be like kind of evenly between those, right? Because you looked in your book, you looked at the guide, you placed them at the numbers that you said that they said they should be, or you kind of figured out like, well, breakdowns are generally evenly split. And then you kind of like figure out where you need in-betweens. And that fine art of adding in-betweens is really where it does turn into, I would say, like, the practice. And same thing with like, knowing where to use certain principles, where, I look at, so here's a good example. I hope that answers the question about like, how long does it take? The answer is like, your time is shortened by looking at the guides that we've recommended for you. So please keep those guides, because they're lifesavers. That's why the one book is called, the one recommended text is called The Survival Kit. But the other thing is just like, again, this is why we have you do tons of practice, because the only way you really internalize these things is practicing. And that's why like character animation and animation theory both just have a ton of principles of animation practice things in 2D and 3D so that you get a sense of them in 2D because you're drawing them and you're having that sort of like intimate experience of using them because like you understand, you absorb better when you do it physically, but then you get to see how they work in 3D and how to like kind of strong arm 3D and beat the way the computer wants to interpolate it. But yeah, I mean this is an art, and arts take time and practice to do. So it's like drawing, except you're drawing a bunch and doing it on timing. But that's a great question though, because it really gets at the core of like why we're doing it the way we're doing it. So thank you for that lovely question. Somebody else says we've all been staring at chat windows as of late. Yeah. See, I'll say this as a teacher. I never taught online before coming here. And my first online course was last fall with Games for Education. Now I'm glad I had that experience so that I could apply the lessons I learned to like everything once this happened. But I really miss being in a room and able to like talk to people and being able to like, because I'll say it, like you kind of, and I think everybody does this, like it's like when you get an email, you automatically assume that the tone of the email is worse than the person actually intends it. They might mean it neutral to friendly, but you might interpret it as like dire and angry. So there is very much, I think, when you're just chatting to text boxes, like, you don't get a sense of body language and a reaction. So you don't really, for me at least, you don't really know. It's like, are people engaging? Are they liking the content? Is the class interesting? I don't know. So yeah, it's people need to stop doing dumb crap so that we can nip this thing in the bud and then be able to have in-person classes again. Anyway, so arcs. So if you're looking at this and be like, why does he abruptly go between two things? Remember video game animation, we're just going to have the programmer. This is actually two animations I stitched together into one GIF. So this is a mosquito enemy, but really I have him here to show you, because he has this like arcing windup. So arcs, most natural motion happens in arcs, so use them. We move in arcs. Our bodies are made to move in arcs and circles. When we move, we do so in arcing motions. So you want to make your motions work in arcs. And one of the things that I gave a lot of feedback when we did the bouncing ball, for example, is that some people had their bouncing ball. There's a ball around here. Well, pretend that this pear is a ball, and a lot of people had their bouncing balls going in like straight lines. Again, this is the computer taking over. This is like interpolation. So if you have like a keyframe here and a keyframe here, the computer is going to make them, shortest distance between 2 points, whereas you actually want that because physics happen in motion. Now, unless you actually throw something, nobody was there, don't worry. Unless you actually throw something, it'll move in a straight line if you do that. But that's because you've applied force. So if something has a lot of force behind it, oh, thank you. Thank you. That's actually very nice because feedback is good because it lets me fix the class if there are problems. But also, again, staring at text windows is hard. Teaching to my camera is weird. So arcs are helpful because, again, motion happens in arcs, and unless you're like applying a significant force to something, it's probably going to default to an arc. Arcs also, though, like can really smooth out an animation, and again give a sense of life to an animation. So here's a Little Mermaid pencil test by Glenn Keane. And Little Mermaid's kind of an interesting example of this for two reasons. One, she's underwater, so everything is follow through. And two, there's arcs everywhere because, again, she's underwater, so she doesn't have like a ground to react to. So she is always like everything is moving in these waves and arcs. So, you know, this is an extreme case, but you can see like how smooth the animation like an arc can make. And again, it's not just like when you're doing. Also, I threw it because it's like, hey, look, my arm moved in an arc, even though you're viewing it from straight on. It was an arc. No. So, but even if you do like a face animation, so here's another moon thing. And I actually did some follow through on the nose to emphasize, like, make the face kind of smushy. We've talked a lot about smears in animation, and like having a smushy frame can really add a lot to a transition. But see, I moved the face in an arc rather than like straight between the points to make it kind of like smoother and feel a little more interesting. And then same thing with like, look at the craters on the different parts of the moon here. You know, I could have just had them go straight between 2 points, but I moved them in a little bit of an arc, depending on where they need to be. And again, just the whole thing seems so much smoother when you do that. So there was a question before of like, does it take a long time to understand? On this animation, I feel, and this was like just last week, I really tried to hit everything with arcs because I'm like, well, I got a face. Let me really play with this. And it wasn't that I wasn't using arcs before, but it's like, where can I really overemphasize this, like, you know, man in the moon face? And just doing that, I think, like, you know, I look at even stuff I'm otherwise proud of, and I'm like, man, you know, I wish I did this after the moon, because then I could have, like, really, you know, turned it up to 11. And that's not to say that stuff that came before was bad. I'm just kind of like, no. Our programmer also has an animation degree for this game. He has an animation degree. So, like, I run everything by him. I'm like, does this look good, Ben? And if it doesn't look good, he's able to give me, like, actually had 4 years of animation school as opposed to almost like self-teaching like I've been doing over time. You know, he's able to give me some really good feedback. And there are ones where I was like, oh no, I'm about to get ripped apart. And he goes, oh my gosh, it's great. So this is why like feedback is always really good, because you got to get out of your headspace, because you only ever see your errors. Other people won't see the errors. But yeah, so like, you know, I added tons of arcs here, and it made like an animation that I'm pretty happy with, which is why I put it in the thing. Arcs are pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to do the 2 questions here. But secondary action, I'm going to do 2 questions, mostly just because it's the last thing. So secondary action is the last one, and what it's about, and I should preface this one by saying that be careful to... So like overlapping action is different parts of the body will move on different timings, right? And what that refers to, again, is that like stuff reacts to other stuff and thus will seem to move at different paces. Because one might finish its arc after something else finishes its arc because it is, you know, again, a braid flopping behind or clothing or something like that. So that is still referring specifically to physical force. Secondary action is literally another body part is moving in a different way. And the reason that those two are different but still meaningful is that, you know, if you have a main action, so here we have like Nemo, you know, looking up, because like a lot of time in the comic is spent by Nemo just being like, you know, and so we needed like a look up, or, you know, a kind of amazed animation, right? So, you know, I could have had him just be like, but, you know, this is animation, so he's got to do like the, but then, you know, what else? Like, that's kind of still boring. Oh, let's have his arms go like, you know, like do something else. And because his arms do something else, and then again, you have follow through with his sword, and his hair a little tiny bounce on his hair. But because like his arms do something else, that becomes a way more interesting animation. Now, I broke a principle of animation here because I have the arms mirrored instead of being like, but we'll talk about that one next week. But for something so small, it's okay. Plus, you know, like all the poses in McKay are these very mirrored poses, so I broke a principle there. But so so secondary action. What kind of motions have secondary action? Well, like run cycles, and this is actually why we assigned run cycles, are like the king of secondary action. Because, you know, when you run, you don't run like with your arms down, unless you do. But, you know, you might see like somebody's character on Saturday Night Live run that way. But like when I was in high school, like they had a character, Mary Catherine Gallagher, and she would always like run around with her arms down like this. And that was kind of like social awkward run, right? So run cycles are like where you know, but most people like swing their arms. And you know, there might be some other thing going on as they run. So that's secondary action in running, is like when you actually swing your arm. So that's why run cycles are great examples and great places to practice secondary action. So like, you know, and how much secondary action you have really gives you a sense of like who the character is. So, you know, Nemo has his bounce that holds on the, like, the, you know, the ups a lot. Peony is a little more serious, and she's a little more precise because she's like actually kind of a special forces person. And by kind of, I mean Slumberland Special Forces. She has like a ninja run, but still bounce because like we're not drawing a Naruto comic or Naruto cartoon here. You know, same thing. Princess, like she's holding her dress up so she doesn't swing her arms. But her shoulders react. And then Flip, he's kind of gruff. So like he keeps his arms in because he's ready to punch, but like he gets a little, you know, his swings aren't as extreme. But also you do get some follow through on his shirt tails. So, you know, like again, the style and what the content of the secondary action is actually matters a lot. But again, like you that's based on style, personality, you know, who the character is. Nemo is like a bouncy 7-year-old. Peony is kind of like serious. The princess is, you know, more graceful, and Flip is like, you know, you know, I don't know, how does one encapsulate all that is Flip in one word? But you know, these characters have different personalities, and we direct their secondary action that way. So yeah, run cycles are great, and that's why we assigned one, because they're great for, you know, figuring out secondary action. But again, secondary action can emphasize what's going on. So like here we have Mushu, and he's doing like this transition from one emotion to another, and so his body moves one way, but then again, like, see, his arms are on completely different timing. You get a stretch frame, and, you know, but the secondary action of raising his arms really quickly gives this action like a lot of really interesting layers. It's almost like you want to have different layers of animation going on at once, and that'll really like beef up emotion. It'll add more dimension to it. And again, it's not all evenly timed. You see some slow in and slow out from the poses. So 1, 2, 3 and 9, 10, 11 are really close, whereas the other ones are farther apart. Same thing with the arms. Like, look how close all the little green dots are, and then suddenly you have a farther out dot, and then a stretched out dot, and then they clump up together again. So there's some slow in, slow out. There are arcs, and there are there's some follow through and secondary action. So the arms are both like follow through a little bit, but also secondary action because they eventually outpace the head when he lifts the arm up. So again, like, and again, squash and stretch. There's everything here. Here's some enemies. The bird slow in, slow out because it's like flap, 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 flap. And then follow through of like the kind of robot head. But, you have both overlapping action with like the head and the tail and the little feather on top reacting, but to the main flap. And really the body reacts to the main flap through, so the whole bird is follow through. And also notice there's like gears just turning inside. And let me know if I need to repeat everything. I got this little thing that said like a plugin was down my browser. But like, see, the gears on the bird, on the robot bird, are turning. And those gears just kind of give you like a constant, again, another layer of activity. And then same thing with this creature on the left. He's rising and falling. His thing, his coils are undulating a little bit. He's blinking. Now, his blinking is like, this is kind of evenly timed, but you get a little extra bit here because we wanted it to be like kind of a weird creepy. So we're like, let's evenly time this and like hold the blink longer. But, look at he's also like throwing the projectile. He's going to throw it. He's like tossing it in the air. And kind of lets you know, like, this is an enemy with a projectile, because that's what happens. He like throws that at you. So him having that gives you, like, again, some secondary motion going on, instead of it being like a character, like an eyeball thing floating up and down like you might see elsewhere. And then, now, pardon the like lack of detailed background. We just made this to be not detailed, and then we're gonna like plug it into other detailed places. But like, we're gonna plug this into different environments. But I don't know why it has that frame of, probably Photoshop. Yeah, I think I rendered an extra frame without him on it. Why it has the blink there at the end. But so here we have this dragon, and the dragon flies in and lands, and then the guy's like, hey, open your mouth, dingbat, and he like hops on him, and then the dragon opens his mouth. Because in McKay, and we've looked at this character before, Bosco the dragon is like the subway, basically, or like a royal carriage. So what happens here is that we have the dragon come in, and so this actually like has a lot of this going on, but again, it's like a more complicated animation. But so in terms of secondary action, when you have characters riding other things, that's like kind of instant secondary action, because it's like, what's the character doing? What's the thing they're riding on doing? So it's like cowboy on a horse, character on a vehicle. You are animating these different things, and the character will animate differently from the thing they're riding on. So that's sort of instant secondary action. But like, you know, if we're looking at animals in particular, you know, tails and manes and things like that, you're going to get follow through on that. But you also get secondary action if, like, you know, the cowboy is going like this with the reins when he's in a gallop, or here on Bosco, like when he lands, his tail is just kind of wagging a little bit because he's basically just a giant dog. And, you know, the guy is doing stuff. Like the guy bends over and is like, oh, that stupid dragon didn't open his mouth again. I give him like kind of a jaded sense because like in my head, he's just like, man, 3 more years and then I get my pension. But, you know, the dragon lands, the guy does something, the dragon reacts. The back and forth gives you like you know, there's like a lot of secondary action happening. But with stuff like this, you can really get into like the guy maybe shifts a little bit when the dragon turns around. The dragon's horns kind of go like, you know, this is like where you can kind of put all this stuff together is in animations like this. That's kind of it. I guess we got time for one question, but ask me one question and then I'll shut down the stream while you just stare at this dragon landing eternally. Ask me a question. Any questions? There's a little bit of squash and stretch in this too when he flops down and when the guy jumps on his head, he like bounces a little bit. But he's a big dragon, so like I didn't do too much because he's a giant dragon. Presumably very sturdy. What's your favorite color? Red. All right. Excellent question. That's all for today. I look forward to seeing everybody next week for Principles of Animation Part 3. Revenge of Squash and Stretch. I like how the scene is framed here. Reminds me of rooms in Castlevania games. Yeah, I wouldn't say Nemo's gonna be a Metroidvania. But it's definitely... It's going to be more like a Wonder or Monster World or Wonder Boy game where you have like a hub world that takes you to smaller areas you can explore. So that's kind of how we're structuring it, is that instead of being like one giant exploratory platformer, it's going to be broken up into like hub and spokes. But yeah, in terms of the framing, like this is totally meant to be, you know, in the version where we get all the money that we need to build the game of our dreams, pun intended, this is going to be like your transportation, your quick travel room. So Bosco will like quick travel you between stuff. Kind of like Hollow Knight. Kind of like the stags in Hollow Knight. So, but yes, framing is important, and we'll talk about some of that next time. All right, bye.